My name is Larry Brodsky, and I was the ninth child in a family of 12 that my mother gave birth to. Even though all of them didn't survive, it was still a rather large family to cope with. My family background was very traditional, Orthodox upbringing. And my early part of my life was greatly influenced by the fact that I was brought up in such a strict Orthodox background. And I can't say that it did me any harm, but I will say that I have since then fallen away. I've become, if you want to use the expression, integrated or more Americanized or whatever, but I don't regret the fact that I was born and brought up in that kind of an atmosphere, because it brought a lot of color and understanding of Jewishness as a traditional Jew would know. So to go back, as I said, we're a large family, and we lived in Chelsea, Massachusetts, and lived in a rather small flat, cold water flat, it was called in those days. But we never felt that we were poor, because my father was not a great provider, but provided enough to make us that we never had to be on welfare. We never had to go outside the family to seek help. But to begin at the beginning, my father came here first, because I guess all the money they had was just for him to come over and start a new life in America. So he came in, he was alone here for almost 4 years. And then my mother came with, up to that time, all girls, all my sisters. There was Sadie and Lil and Dawn and Sonia and Bertha.
Where did they live in Europe?
Near Kiev. Kiev Geberlia. The town was called Teplik. There's a funny thing, I read a book once by a Jewish author in New York, and she mentioned the town of Teplik. Now, I had looked at all kinds of maps trying to find out exactly where this Teplik, and there was two villages, Teplik and Kiblich. One was my father's and one was my mother's. But Teplik was the one that they lived in, and I saw the name in there, so I wrote away to this author, and I said to her, I've never seen the name, and I looked at all the maps. Could you tell me where you got the name, and if you know where it is? So it took a little while for her to wrote back with her. She wrote apologetically that she's been away, but she got my letter, and she's sorry she can't tell me because she got the name out of a Shalom Aleichem book. So she used it in her story too.
Well, something that comes to mind, you mentioned, I think in Yiddish, the near Kiev, right? How
yeah,
do you say it?
Kiev Geberlia. That means a state of.
Right. Well, I never knew that. That's what it meant growing
Right.
up. And my grandfather also comes from an area right near Kiev. And I was always told that in Yiddish, he came from the way you just stated it.
Kiev.
And I always thought that was the name of the town. I think that my mother, who knows Yiddish and speaks Yiddish, also thought that was the town too.
Yeah.
And somewhere along the line, I realized through the translation that that was not the name of the town.
No.
And so I don't know where he's from, but that he's from an area,
right, yeah.
around Kiev.
Well, I will very truthful with you. I didn't do an in-depth research, but I try to get a hold of old maps, before the revolution and so forth at the library. But do you think that any of these Stedlich appeared on a map?
Right.
No way. And
Right.
Maybe there was 100 or 200 residents. They were never going to appear. And of course, with the revolution and the changes, they just got wiped out. There's nothing left. So there's really
That's right.
no records, So when they try to make a family tree, I can go back as far as my grandparents.
Right.
That's it. Because there's no written records of anything else. That would, if I could go to Russia and say, I'll go to the city hall in Teplik, well, they'll say, what?
Right.
So there is no such a thing. But anyway, so my mother came, and she settled in Chelsea because she had brothers already living there. My father had set up a residence living with one of his in-laws, and he had a job as a tailor in Boston. So they managed, And my sisters went to school, and I was born a year after my father got here. I was the first child born in America, and then there were 3 after me, another brother and 2 younger sisters. And we became known as the American, the 4 Americans, because we were born here, whereas the others had to become naturalized. But, so we grew up in a rather cramped area, 4 rooms with 8, 10 people. But luckily, my sister got married at an early age, my older sister, and it was a celebration of tremendous sorts. For his daughter to get married, and all that. But also a celebration for us, because it emptied a bed, so we had more room. But we managed, as I said, and we didn't feel the poverty, because all around us was the same kind of people. And I was brought up in a very traditional, orthodox manner. My first memory of my father and I doing anything together is going to shul, he holding my little hand when I was probably 4 or 5. And the second image is of me sitting at the kitchen table while he's teaching me from the siddur how to pray in the Yiddish alphabet and pointing out with either a toothpick or a match, a wooden match that was olive face and so on. And it's a fond memory that I got in my mind, I can still picture it. And he did the same for my brother. The 2 girls, well, they were girls, they didn't need that kind of thing. So that's the way I grew up, and it was a great influence in my life until I was 16 or 18. Right up through my bar mitzvah, and even when I was going to school in high school, I could not go to school until I had said my prayers in the morning. Put on tefillin, said my prayers, had my breakfast, then I could go. No matter how late it was, you want to be late at school, fine, get up earlier. But you don't skip saying your prayers. But it's something that you accept. Part of your life, you accept it, we did it. So I grew up, and I graduated from Chelsea High School. It was during the depth of the Depression, 1931. Money was not around too much, so I said, well, we'll see about going to college, we'll wait. So at that time, the Civilian Conservation Corps came into being under the FDR regime, presidency. And so I went up there and I spent almost a year there. That was reforestation and doing works projects, for young men who couldn't find a job. It was limited, I think, to ages 18 to 22, or so I forget exactly what the ages were, but I fell in that category, and it was an experience for me. It was like almost being in the army without firearms, without learning the military drills and so forth. But it was good for me to learn, and to say, and that way I got into the world, outer world. The world that I knew was enveloped in Chelsea, which is like a small ghetto. Within a ghetto. Chelsea was a very Jewish city. I would say the population in Chelsea was anywhere between 40 and 50% Jewish. It was so Jewish that on Jewish holidays, the schools would close down in certain areas because nobody would come. It would be empty, so they closed them down. So getting out into the civilian corps, getting out and meeting with other people, opened up a new world to me, this stuff that I'd never seen before. So in that way, and and it gave me something to do, and a little bit of surveying, which I was very interested in engineering. So I was there for a year, and then I got out and went to work for my brother-in-law in a market in Newton. And after I had made a few dollars, enough to collect to go to school, I went to Northeastern and started school there. But it was tough going, 31, 32 were tough years. And so I stuck it out for 2 years on the cooperative plan. And then, for whatever reasons, I mean, I can't even in my own mind exactly pinpoint what the reasons were. Part of them were economic. Part of it might have been the fact that, I felt I was growing and getting older, and I wasn't getting all the things out of life that I should be getting. In other words, maybe I just didn't want to sacrifice enough to go to school. So after the second year, I got out and went to work I went to work in the grocery store because that was my experiences in a Jewish chain, the M. Weiner chain, which I would say 50% of the young men in the greater Boston area either worked for the M. Weiner Company or the Rabinowitz Company. The Rabinowitz Company eventually became Stop and Shop. The M. Weiner Company, because of internal problems, just faded from the scene. So I worked there for several years and took some courses and night classes and so forth, just for my own education, more or less. The people that influenced my life, I would say, were one or two teachers in the 9th and 10th grades who did a lot for me and opened up vistas for me. One in particular that I liked, Miss Kotson, taught American history. And she really instilled in me a lot of history of politics and government and so forth. So I'm grateful to her for that. But within my own family, my sister Sarah, who afterwards became Sonia, was, I would say, the first influence that brought me out of the family, broke me away from it. In this respect, she was a rebel. She was 6 years my senior, but she was so far ahead of the rest of the family in becoming Americanized. And that, to tell you the things that she did in those days would be like saying that she was living today. She was, in other words, in 1920s, she broke away from the family, went to live by herself in her own apartment, which was unheard of in a Jewish family, for a daughter to leave home and go live by her own. But she had a very independent spirit, a pioneering spirit. And so from her, she took me out. And she took me to restaurants and to concerts and to theaters and plays and things like that. So she did instill in me a world that I hadn't seen before. You know, I went to the movies as a child, but that was mostly. And the other influence was, believe it or not, a younger brother, my brother Jack. He was 2 years my junior, but in some things he was way ahead of me intellectually. He opened up a world of art and music and culture, literature. He went to BC night school, and whatever he learned, I was working at the time, already working, and he went to school after high school, and he was one that led me into this another new world that opened up for me. So that was the two influences that I had. I'm trying to think now what my world was like, you know, growing up was centered around Yiddishkeit in the beginning. You know, it came Friday or the holidays were always very observant. We didn't skip Friday night to Saturday. It was going to shul, coming home, having traditional Yiddish, Jewish meal, saying your prayers and singing smiros and things like that. So those are all things that are with me, and it'll never leave you. Mm-hmm. And so I think it gave me something, added something to my character and culture. So that almost led up to the time that the war came along, and I didn't want to go into the army. My brother went into before I did. He was drafted into the army. I had a high number, so I wasn't, but I didn't like the army, so I enlisted in the Navy. And I served in the Navy in the what they call the Seabees. But it was a construction battalion. And because I had taken courses at Northeastern in surveying and so forth. So I put that down and they assigned me to that job. Although I didn't do very much of that. Finally ended up in the Seabees as a cook, of all things, in the commissary, which I didn't mind. Excuse me. Being a cook had a lot of advantages, as you can imagine.
Sure.
So I served my 3 years and 6 months and 16 days and came home. And in that 3-year period, I had met a girl before I went into the service at my sister's wedding. She was one of the guests. It's a long story how she lived with the family that my sister had married into. After she lost her mother, she went to live with this family, so she became like part of the family. She came to stay overnight and stayed for 18 years. So I met her at the wedding, and we struck up a friendship, and we dated a couple of times. But our relationship really flowered in our correspondence during the 3 years I was away. And when I came back, we picked up from there, and shortly after we were married. We were married in 1946. And we've had a happy marriage. We have 3 children, a girl and 2 boys. They're all married. The oldest one, my daughter, has no children, but I doubt that she will have it if she's beyond that age. My middle son, Joseph, has 3 lovely boys, 3 grandsons. And my youngest has just been married a year and a half or so. And they may have children, I don't know yet. And I enjoy the family. Oh yes, so after the war, when I came back, I went back to my old job with the M. Weiner Company, but my wife's brother was working in a sort of diner restaurant type kind of business, and the man wanted to sell it, so we talked it over, and I went into business with him into this restaurant, which was called the Purple Cow at the time. Actually, it was called Humpty Dumpty, but we bought it. But because it was a franchise deal, we had to change the name, so we changed it from Humpty Dumpty to Purple Cow. And I was in that business for 15 years. It was hard work, but, it provided a living. And since my experience in the Navy had given me some experience in cooking, I was handy and was able to manage the business. But unfortunately, my brother-in-law died, and then it became very difficult. And so when the opportunity came along, I got out of it after 15 or 16 years. And it was due to the fact that McDonald's bought the property and put up another type of restaurant. Which, although looking back on it now, I'm grateful to them for getting me out of it. At that time, it was quite a blow, because they were 15, 16 years, and you have to start over again. So we looked around, and my wife was an artist, and had been studying with this man for many years, suggested that we go into the art supply business. So we did in a small way in Cambridge. And since I had a year's leeway notice from my landlord, my wife, with a friend of hers, opened up a shop. And while I was working at the Purple Cow, supplying the funds necessary to keep this place going, they started the business and kept it going while I phased out the other things. So after a year there, I went into the art supply and picture framing business. The picture framing came about because I had always been interested in woodworking and had a small shop of sorts in my house. So that became not tremendously successful, but successful enough to give us a good living. And for me, at that time, raising the family, the 3 children were already into being, wife, and we bought a house in West Roxbury. So it just provided a good living, and we enjoyed it. And we enjoyed the work a lot more than I enjoyed the restaurant business. My wife was involved only to in the respect that she did the bookkeeping for me. So we went along, and the children grew up. My daughter went to college. My son Joseph started to go to college. We decided no. He went into construction work. My third son went into school of music at Berkeley. But eventually, he graduated from there. But music is a tough thing to make a living at, unless you're one of the top 100 in the country or something. So eventually, my youngest son, Michael, and my daughter, Jane, came into the business with me. My son, Joseph, didn't know anybody. And I retired about 8 years ago, and they too are still running. Both of them are still running the business. What can I tell you about? Well, let's see. The restaurant business was a very trying business, and we didn't get much leisure time out of it. So my wife and I had very little time for vacations and going away. And the children were growing up, and it was tough, you know. But we managed to, you know, go away for maybe short over weekends and things like that, because of the fact that my brother-in-law would cover for me, I would cover for him, so we managed it. But when he passed on, and I was alone, then it became real tough. And so we didn't have a vacation for maybe 15 years, as much as we liked it. So it was sort of a godsend that McDonald's came along and took the business away. And we got into the art supply business, and after a couple of years or 3 years, we were able to, with my daughter coming into the business after college, we were able to enjoy more freedom and enjoy some of the fruits of our labors. And we started to travel to Europe, other countries and other places. To tell you a little bit about my immediate family, all sisters, and my being the first boy, I'm sure, I don't recall it, but it must have been some occasion for the first boy in the family. Even though my mother had had 2 sons before, but they died in infancy in the old country. So I was really something, And then they had a second one, so that was really great. So I might have been pampered, I don't know, spoiled, or whatever the word that you want to say. But my wife says, people are not like fruit, they don't spoil. And I'm sure my mother and father were not rich enough so that they could spoil me in kind of things that they'd go out and buy expensive toys or anything like that. But they were overjoyed to have, a cottage, as they call it.
Right.
So, as I say, my older sister was married when I was only about 6 years old. And then a second sister was married when I was about 8 years old. And then we moved up the ladder. My mother and father bought a house, a 3-decker house. And we moved out of this four-room flat. And our lives changed a little bit. We had 6 rooms now, and 2 of the daughters were gone, so we really had room. We didn't have separate bedrooms or anything. At least 2 of us could share a room instead of 3 of us sharing a bed. So that was a big change in our life when they did that. My wife says, and this is a funny quote of hers, that the reason we have such a nice life is because my whole family moved west. So we stayed here. Because all my sisters moved west after first one of them went and thought the life out in California, so one of them, she prevailed upon the others, either for economic reasons or climate reasons or for whatever reasons, all migrated west. This was about 45 years ago. So as I say, it left myself and my parents and my two oldest sisters here. And I would never dream of leaving my parents, as I felt that I owed them at least that much, to stay with them in their older years, to see for whatever needs they needed, even though they weren't never dependent on me financially, but it's nice to have somebody around. So I stayed on in spite of all the entreaties from my sisters to come out west. It's so wonderful and so on. We decided to stay here, and I'm not sorry. I don't feel any regrets about having stayed here, and I don't think I gave up anything.
You mentioned the term Kaddish, being a Kaddish. I know what that means, but if you could also explain in your own words.
A Kaddish means I'm a young man, even though maybe today you wouldn't use it because now women can go to shul and say the prayer for the dead after your parent dies. So when a young man is born into the family, they say, I got a Kaddish, somebody who will say the prayer of the dead when I die. So that's what the terms they say, a Kaddish. When they say a Kaddish, it means that boy was born.
Okay.
Happily, I didn't have to do it until I was late in my 30s. Both my parents lived to a ripe old age. My dad lived almost 86, 88 years. My mother lived almost 10 years after him. She was about the same age when she was younger. Let's see, when did I start to change from being Orthodox in the extreme, really? I would no more think of having a dairy or milk mix after eating meat if I didn't wait the full 6 hours necessary to, as the ritual says. I really started to change when I went to work at my brother-in-law's shop and met other people. And, at first I'd take a brown bag for lunch from school, but my mother says, it's a goyish market, you can't eat there. So for the first few months or so I took it. They said, hey Mark, best things to eat there, I'll eat cheese, I'll eat bread, But pretty soon from the bread you eat a little ham, or you have a fried, it's a gradual falling away, if you want to put it in those terms. And then not only that, but as you're growing up and you get older, the boys will go out on the town and they go out and have a hamburger. You become one of the boys. The peer pressure just makes you do these things. You start to question it. And like one said to me, why should you be so leery about it? So what has your soul got to do with your stomach? You want to do it, you enjoy it, go ahead and do what you want. If it doesn't hurt the other people, why should it hurt you? Well, it's, you could argue this back and forth all you want. I can see that are you Orthodox?
I'm conservative, observant conservative.
Yeah. So, you could argue this back and forth.
Right.
I don't put as much importance on those things today as I did growing up because it was imbued in me.
Mm-hmm.
They said, this is important. As a Jew, this is what you should do. This is what you should be. But today I feel my Jewishness takes more than a traditional. It takes on the role of philosophical, historical. By birth, I'm a Jew, and I know that I don't have to be Jewish just by eating kosher products, or not riding on the Sabbath, or not putting a light on the Sabbath. My house on Shabbos, there was candles and there was a kerosene lamp, and when those went out, you were in the dark. That was it. But I don't feel that way about it. So they say it's a thing that grows on you. You grow into. I don't regret the background, and I don't regret what I've become. As far as my children, we try to give them a Jewish background in the respect that they went to temple, and they were bar mitzvah and the bas mitzvah. We always have traditional holiday celebrations at home, but we didn't do things like my mother or father did. My wife lit candles, but that wasn't the source of life. We just did it as a symbolic thing, the thing to do for Shabbos. And I didn't forbid my children from switching the light on or go for a ride or anything like that in the Sabbath. So as I said, I gave them a background. It didn't take entirely because children go their own way no matter what. And I don't want to use the word. I will say that my 3 children married out of the faith. I will say maybe I would have preferred, I don't want to say what made me happy because I'm happy about their marriages. I would have preferred that they married within it, but we have no control over these things. Right. Had he come to ask my advice and said, I have a choice, I might have advised him. But when he comes back and gives me a fait accompli, he says, look, I met this wonderful girl, I met this wonderful fellow, and we want to get married, but he's not Jewish. I am very happy about the fact that I have 3 lovely in-law children. My two daughter-in-laws and my son-in-law. I couldn't ask for better, no matter what their religion was. So, and they've kept my children happy. They have a happy marriage, so I'm grateful for that. What else can I tell you? What did I say? So, about 8 years ago, I'm 78 years old now, and my 70th birthday, for various and sundry reasons, I decided that's enough. I'm going to retire. I might as well enjoy some of the things that I worked for since my first job was 15 or 16 years old in Chelsea in a factory. Enough's enough. If I'm going to have any years left to enjoy, now's the time to do it. So I retired, and my children took over the business, and my wife and I, lifestyle changed. The children were all gone from the house. My youngest son was living alone. The other 2 were married. And I felt this was the time to do it. So I retired. They took over the business. And our lifestyles changed. My wife devoted a lot more time to her artwork. She got a studio, and she paints, and she goes to galleries, museums, concerts, and so forth. And my life changed too. Some of the things that I never had time for. I started to take up wood sculpting. I started getting more involved in the Jewish Community Center. Getting more involved in politics and so forth. So that's where our life is today.
What type of role does the JCC play in your life?
Well, it gives me an opportunity to meet with people of my age group. On a level at which I could discuss so many different things. Jewishness, politics as it relates to Israel, Jewish life in America, but mostly I enjoy just the socializing with people in my age group. And, exchange ideas. So that's why I enjoy JCC so much.
Yesterday you talked a little bit about life during the Depression.
Well,
Perhaps if you could talk a little bit about it today too.
I can say that I know more about the Depression now, I shouldn't say now, after it was over than I did during the Depression. And the reason I say that is because we didn't have to make that great sacrifices. We didn't have that much that the Depression made a difference. We had the basic essentials of life. My father made enough money so we had a house, and we had clothes, even though some of them might have been homemade by my mother or my aunt, and we had food. We never lacked for that. So when the Depression came, my father still had his job. And in fact, Two of my sisters were married, so they went on their own way, even though they had contributed to the upkeep of the house. So we didn't have that great many sacrifices. We didn't feel that we gave up that much. So as I say, I learned more about what depression meant to a lot of people who really felt it. My father was never out of a job. That was the main thing. He always worked. So therefore, there was always an income coming in. So we may have, done without a new suit for Pesach, or a new pair of shoes. I might have been influenced by our economic status in giving up school when I did. But outside of that, I don't feel there was a great difference in our lives during the Depression because of the fact my father had a steady job, even though it wasn't a job which he kept getting promotions and getting more money. It was enough to sustain the family and keep us going. So we had all the things that we needed.
You mentioned purchasing a car yesterday.
Well, that was...
back during that time period.
I was 21 years old. And, in those days, not everybody had a car. My sister Sonia had a car. She had bought, but she was older than I. And, I had a job now with my brother-in-law, earning the magnificent sum of, started at $8 a week, went up to 11 for a year or so. So I felt that I could afford a car. So, I saw an ad in the paper and went to look at the car. This was a Dodge Roadster. A Roadster is what we call what do you call them now? I forget the word. What it's called now? A sports coupe.
Okay.
With a rumble seat and a roof that folded back. And I paid the magnificent sum of $5 for it. And I only bought it after I told the man, if you bring the key out and turn it on and it starts, I'll buy it otherwise. So he turned the key on and started and I drove it away. And that was my first car, which we had a wonderful time for 2 years. This rumble seat with a folded back roof, which leaked. We had to put rugs over the top in the rain.
When you say we, who are you referring to?
Oh, my brother and all my friends that enjoyed it. We had a sort of what we call, not a gang, but a group that stuck together. In fact, I just thought of it. We call ourselves the Yowzers. Why did we call ourselves the Yowzers? There was a performer on radio, no television, it was radio, who had a program, and he opened the program by saying, Yowza, Yowza, Yowza. I'm trying to think of his name, the performer. So we call ourselves the Yowzers. It was, we didn't pay any dues, we didn't have any meetings or anything, but the 6 of us were Yowzers. So that's what I say, we enjoyed it. We could always squeeze at least 5 people in there. If you really wanted to squeeze real tight, you get 3 and 3 would make it 6, but that was kind of tight. But we enjoyed it, and it was a chance to get out and go to New Hampshire, go to the Cape, go to places like that. So that was another way of opening up the world to us. I was the first woman that had a car. This was in 1933 or 34, I think 33 or 34. About 34, something. So that was another chance, breaking family, away from family and getting out in the world. But my father never had a car. The only entertainment day was going to the Yiddish theater, which was another big experience in my life. I had an uncle named Izzy, who was my mother's youngest sister. who had come over with my mother as one of her daughters. He included her in order to get her to come. And needing another visa or something, she said she had another daughter, so this Aunt Fanny came with her. But this Uncle Izzy was her husband. And he was, if you want to use the, in literature they call him a ne'er-do-well. Why was he a ne'er-do-well? Because he liked to drink a little bit, liked to play cards a little bit, more than he can afford. So, and his family suffered because of it. And my mother was always the intermediary. She was the one that would go to her brothers. She had two older brothers who were fairly well off. They were in the construction business. Too big, a few dollars for family, because she was starving, the children can't pay rent and so forth. So she was always the intermediary. And Izzy, Uncle Izzy, was the ne'er-do-well. He had jobs. He held down some jobs here and there. But he never could put $10 together for next month's rent or whatever. But one of his careers, he became what I like to facetiously refer to as the advertising manager for a Jewish theater company in Chelsea. This was a traveling, they didn't have a Jewish theater group in Chelsea, but from New York they would bring companies who would put on plays in the theater, which they would rent for the week or 2 weeks, whatever it was. And some of the big names from New York Jewish theater used to come here. And he was what Gary Gill facetiously called the advertising manager. What did that consist of? He went around to all the stores and put up the posters in the windows advertising the fact that the Hollanders are coming to put on such and such a play in such and such a time. And for that, the person in the store was allowed 2 tickets, 2 free passes to go see the play. So my father was had a shop at the time, a tailor shop. He was on business for himself. So he always managed to get 2 tickets from Uncle Izzy to go see the show. But I prospered from that because he got me the job of selling refreshments between the acts. I mean, a tonic, a drink, and candy, no popcorn. Popcorn was not in vogue yet at the time.
Right.
It was just candy and cookies and drinks, cold drinks. And it was a wonderful experience because I saw all these Yiddish plays, these melodramas, and these tearjerkers. And you sat there and listened to it. It was just so wonderful to hear them all. And on top of which I earned a few dollars enough to give me spending money. So that was a wonderful experience in my life. It only lasted a couple of years because, as I say, I don't know how he got the job as advertising manager, and I don't know how he lost it. But when he lost it, I lost my job. And right now, as I say, I'm 78 years old. My wife's 75. We're enjoying life. We have good health. We hope to live out our lives that way. We still go on vacations in the winter time. We have a home in a Cape, which is in Falmouth on a private pond, which we bought about 25 years ago, for which we are grateful at the time we bought it. And as it turned out, my son Joseph bought the house right next to us, and so we had the added pleasure of watching our grandchildren grow up from the time they were born until now. The oldest is 16, and it's a pleasure that no money can buy just to have. As I know, so many of my friends have grandchildren that their children move away, and they see their grandchildren once every 6 months or every 3 months. So this was such a wonderful thing. And it was due to my daughter-in-law. They had gone, my son Joseph had a friend in Seattle who intrigued him into going out there. He says that opportunities for construction was wonderful. Why don't you come up to Seattle? So they went out there and they stayed for a few months and he liked it. They were going to settle there, but his wife said, Helen, she said, I want my children to grow up as loving grandparents. So I'm so grateful for her for having done that. I don't know if I mentioned the fact that I had the one brother and I lost him during the war. He was killed. It was a very sad thing. I was away at the time. And then they had a second tragedy. That's my oldest sister's son. My oldest nephew was killed in the Battle of the Bulge in Europe. And another blow that they suffered. Which I don't think either my parents or my sister never recovered from. I think it contributed to my sister's early demise. So it was a sad time. I guess a lot of families suffer.
How were you able to cope with those losses?
Well, I missed my brother very, very much. Time, I came back, and for a time, I tried to, with my parents, when I came back from the service, after the war was over and I came home, I lived with my parents. I was the only one living with them at the time, and I thought there was some form of consolation, so we console each other until I got married and moved away. We tried to stay close, and it helped. My sister, she had 2 other children, so they helped her in that respect. But she never got it. I wouldn't say words, it's hard to measure these things. I know both my parents suffered greatly from the loss of a child, as any parent would losing a child.
What have been some of the highlights of your life so far?
Well, I had a big bar mitzvah. It was a big highlight. My marriage naturally was one of the big things in my life that came about. I could say that going into the service was a big adventure, but nothing that I look back on with any particular pleasure. Not anything. But my marriage, my wedding was a small wedding, because my wife had no mother. Her father was not well off, and she didn't think we could have a big wedding. But we did have a small ceremony, and it's our family wedding. But we did have a wonderful honeymoon. We went to Cuba at the time when Cuba was still in friends with us, because Batista was still there. So for 2 poor kids like us to go to a place like Cuba and stay at the Nacional was really something.
Sure.
It's something that I credit my wife, because when I asked her if she would like a diamond ring, she says, how can you afford a diamond ring and a honeymoon? I said, I don't think so. She said, well, let's have the honeymoon, and the diamonds will come later. So we enjoyed the honeymoon, and the diamonds, well, I don't know if they came later or not, but they weren't as important. So here we are, we're a happy family. For the most part, my children are all well. My grandchildren are growing up. And I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying life. And as I said, as long as we have good health, we feel we have a good life going forward.
Wonderful.